Hey there, you crazy cats. Welcome back to my channel. It has been a while, and today I'm coming back because I am combining two of my favorite passions, astrology and Superman. Now, Superman's been played by a lot of actors over the years, but have you ever wondered if the stars have influenced how each one of them has embodied the role? Well, what if I were to tell you that maybe the zodiac could predict the vibe of your favorite Superman? In this video, we're going to take a cosmic journey through the actors who have worn the cape and see if their true sidereal sun and moon signs give them an edge or a weakness when betraying the Man of Steel. And by the end of it, obviously, we're going to be able to try and predict how David Corenswet might bring his Superman to life by using the stars as our guide. So let's just fly right into it. So let's start at the very beginning with the first live-action Superman, Kirk Alyn, starring in the 1948 Superman serial. His portrayal came during the height of the film noir era, and you can feel this Scorpio intensity baked right into the tone of the movie. And he, Kirk Alyn, is a Virgo Sun and a Scorpio Moon. So thinking about this, his main villain, she is called the Spider Lady, a mob boss surrounded by secrecy, crime, and shadows. In the plot itself, Superman spends most of his time in the story using his X-ray vision to peer through walls, diving deep underground into secret mines and unraveling the mysteries like a cosmic detective. Classic Scorpio Moon, penetrating the darkness to uncover hidden truths. And here's what that Virgo Sun really shines in. Kirk Alyn's Clark Kent is not exactly memorable, and that's the point. His version of Clark is very pedantic, precise, quietly observant. And there's actually a scene where Perry White tells Clark to finish up his work because it's 8 o'clock, and Alan Kirk's Clark corrects him by saying, "No, my watch says 7:59 and a half." That's Virgo, always focused on the details, even to the point of pedanticism. Now, this Virgo also shows up in his Clark because Alan's Clark is very stiff. He's very stiff, he's very rigid, he's always in uniform, and he's even showing up at his Clark Kent family farm already wearing a full suit, a business suit, and glasses like he just walked straight out of the office. He learns that he's an alien, he accepts responsibility without hesitation, and he vows to protect his identity, all within the span of just a few seconds. Now, Virgo is the servant, after all. And Clark shows that constantly by doing small acts of kindness and holding doors and fixing train tracks and paying attention to the little things, that this is what's going to make life easier for others. But his Scorpio Moon, it creeps in as the story goes on, and he starts letting things get a little bit more messy, willing to reveal his identity when it suits him, like when he exposes himself to the police chief to help him destroy some kryptonite. His Virgo nature plays detective, but his Scorpio Moon also allows for this strategic deception. And at one point by the end of the film, we see that he pretends to be weakened by the kryptonite while secretly wearing a lead-lined suit underneath to trick his enemies and deceive them. This is absolutely brilliant and is the Scorpio to the core. And in the end, Kirk Alyn's Superman just tends to be kind of a dutiful worker bee, following orders. Not necessarily a man wrestling with identity, he's just doing a job. Clark Kent just works here, man. That's a classic Virgo energy. And when the job's done, they all laugh about it in the end. It's a job well done, and it's nothing personal, and that's pretty much it. It's no wonder that this kind of Kirk Alyn version of Superman just kind of is forgotten and left behind in history. Much like that Virgo just being unassuming and often overlooked, this is the case of Kirk Alyn as well. George Reeves. Now let's move into the 1950s with George Reeves, Sagittarian Sun and Pisces Moon. Now this is a Superman of the post-war American optimism era. And George himself even said that he thought that the show didn't have much substance. That's pretty Sagittarian right there. And honestly, that fits his vibe that he brought to the screen. Sagittarius energy is light, adventurous, and it doesn't take things way too seriously. It tries to find the depths of what is true, what is meaningful, but if there's not, it just keeps things light. And while Reeves was the first live-action version to actually fly on camera, that's a pretty pioneering spirit, and that is Sag through and through, as the sky is the limit, and flying is ruled over by Sagittarius. Now, his Clark Kent was more relaxed. It was charming and it was almost smug. He was always leaning against walls, kicking up his feet on desks, smiling at everyone around him, and why not? He knows the big secret. He knows the answers of life. And there's this running joke throughout the show that he's constantly teasing Lois and Jimmy and all these other characters with these sly, double-meaning comments about him being Superman. He's practically begging them to notice, but that Pisces Moon blends the two characters together, and there's a lot of illusion, and nobody ever really figures this out. So unlike Kirk Alyn's careful and meticulous Virgo energy, George Reeves's Clark is much more of a casual confidence. He was straightforward, funny, sarcastic, always giving that I know better Sagittarian bravado, and his Superman was less physical and more of a philosopher. Now, he did have a larger than life viewpoint in busting through all these walls, which is what he was famous or infamous for as his Superman, constantly breaking in through those brick walls like the Kool-Aid Man. But this larger than life kind of spontaneous combustion was really just that, and just his entrances. Otherwise, he wasn't punching his way through a lot of his problems. He was more giving lectures to kids about life lessons, the importance of honesty, responsibility, the big picture. And that's that Sagittarian energy, bringing the moral guidance, aiming for truth and aiming for wisdom. And that Pisces moon, you see it right away in the fact that his Clark and his Superman pretty much blend together like watercolors. There's very little distinction between the two characters, and that fits because of the Pisces gray area, where lines and boundaries just blur and don't typically exist. And plus, that Pisces loves charity and goodwill, and this Superman was often seen promoting things like Kellogg's cereal and encouraging kids to buy savings stamps, blending advertising and altruism into one. And advertisement is specifically ruled over by Sagittarius, and while we do know that the George Reeves series was sponsored by Kellogg's, it is funny to see our Superman hawking some simple grains of wheat in a bowl for kids. Now, one of the best Sagittarius Pisces moments, in my opinion, is when Superman starts to gamble and we see that Clark Kent actually wins at cards. And what's funny about this is because this kind of notion of gambling and winning big is a Jupiter rulership. And traditionally, Jupiter is the co-ruler of both signs, Sagittarius and Pisces. So look at that action showing up in there. And obviously, when we're watching him and he's portraying this character, his character doesn't sit still for very long. He's always promoting good luck. He's saying that he's lucky. He's promoting good cause, and it's all good fun. And this all stems from him putting himself on a pedestal, with that Sagittarian pedestal of what they do and don't do. And also sometimes maybe even being a little bit of the Pisces and knowing some of these things can be addictive. And so you have to be able to do them in a way that's not going to take you too far out in a more self-destructive cycle. So was it deep? Not really. George Reeves' Superman was a product of a simpler post-American War time. And this was full of fun and smiles and hope and good manners, but make no mistake, this Superman carried that Sagittarian fire and that Piscean dreaminess, making you feel safe even if things felt uncertain. So you may smile from time to time, but there's not really a lot of substance. And even the writers and even the actors themselves specified how his Superman just solved problems way too easily, and often the time spending most of the screen time distracting Clark, or having Clark or Superman be doing something else or unfocused or whatever that was until the very end, when Superman would break in through the wall and save the day in seconds. So let's move to Christopher Reeve, most folks' favorite Superman. Now Christopher Reeve, not to be mistaken by George Reeves, they are not related. Christopher Reeve is a Virgo Sun and an Ophiuchus Moon. And if you've never heard of Ophiuchus, you got to look at my astrological breakdown of the Ophiuchus sign, the infamous and taboo 13th zodiac sign, which is a part of True Sidereal Astrology. So by the time Christopher Reeve put on the cape, it was the late 1970s, and this was a time of camp and bright colors and disco and big-budget Hollywood optimism. But Christopher did not want Superman to be a joke. As a Virgo Sun, he wasn't satisfied with playing a caricature. He wanted Superman to be ordinary. He wanted Superman to mean something, to be relatable, to be human. He wanted the everyday person to look at Superman and Clark Kent and think, hey, actually, you know what, that could actually be me. Maybe even if I worked on myself. And true to his Virgo nature, Christopher studied the character in detail. He fixated on the fact that Superman was an orphan, raised by strangers in a strange land and never fully belonging. And he studied how orphans reacted to the world, what they longed for, what they lacked. And his performance was built on this foundation, and it shows. And this is an obvious Ophiuchus Moon thing to do, because Ophiuchus is the archetype of the wounded healer, someone who is often neglected, abandoned, and they need to find some kind of redeeming qualities for themselves to go through some kind of transformation. And we see that this is exactly what Christopher Reeve wanted to focus on in Superman. Was not the fact that he was an alien, was not the fact that he had powers, but the fact that he was abandoned or neglected or orphaned by his Kryptonian parents, and what that may do to a person psychologically. True to his nature, he studied this in detail, and it shows. As Clark Kent, Christopher gave us the definitive depiction of the anxious, awkward, slightly nerdy, totally forgettable guy next door. Meek, fearful, self-effacing, and spineless. And this is the Virgo archetype of the worry warrior in full display. Clark is kind, Clark is thoughtful, he's careful with his words, and he's eager to please, and even down to the small details, like when he tries to open up a stubborn soda bottle in Perry White's office, it spills all over him and he's the butt of the joke. People walk all over him. People take advantage of him. Lois treats him like a pet. She asks him to run errands. She asks him to do all these little things, and the staff casually offload their tasks onto his version of Clark. And what does he do? He does it. And with that classic Virgo internal sigh, he still has that steady dedication to be of service, to be helpful, and to just take it on the chin, right? But beneath that surface of anxiousness, that Virgo hides something that people forget, and that's the fact that they are secret romantics. Virgos don't just fall in love, they study love. They calculate when it's safe to reveal themselves, and that's why you often find a lot of Virgo energy finding itself in becoming friends with people and then slowly weaving their way into their hearts while they're friends. And that's exactly what Clark does with Lois. He doesn't rush in necessarily. He tries to earn her trust first, charms her a little bit as Superman, but like a Virgo in the Clark Kent fashion over the series of his movies, he weaves his way into her heart, and Clark Kent is the person that Lois Lane falls for. The Virgo keeps him humble, and like we see him shaking the hands of the police officers, calling them by name, being polite, never boasting. He's very black and white about what's right and wrong, and he's always doing the job with that kind of service in mind, like when he gets a cat out of a tree for a little girl. That's pure Virgo, dealing with domesticated animals and doing little things here or there to be helpful, right? Nothing super big, nothing super crazy, nothing dramatic, just little services, small things that he can do. And that Ophiuchus, that's a little bit of a wild card. That Superman may be kind, but he's not afraid to intimidate his villains necessarily. He's the first Superman to confront death head on, with this being an Ophiuchus trait, right? That's more of like a Scorpio part 2. Like he watches Jonathan Kent's dad die in front of him. He can't do anything about it, and this destroys him. And then again, he faces Lois Lane's death. She dies. He holds her in his arms, and she's buried by the earth, right? From the earthquake collapse, like the earthquake collapsing the earth. And so what does he do? That Ophiuchus Moon, he breaks the cosmic order. He rewinds time. He goes to the galactic center. He turns the world on its axis, and he heals the cracks and fabrics in reality and transforms it. And with raw willpower, when it's done, he doesn't gloat. He just goes back. He sees Lois. He sees that she's alive, and he doesn't tell her. He keeps it a secret, right? He lets her live, unaware of the fact that he just sacrificed almost like his moral code to not break the rules in order to keep her alive. And that's that classic Virgo Ophiuchus thing right there. You do the right thing, suffer by yourself, but you can heal others silently. And here's the real kicker, and what I find super interesting about this placement is the fact that Christopher Reeve became the wounded healer archetype in the real world as well, right? With Ophiuchus being about this kind of death and rebirth and transformation through suffering and almost becoming paralyzed, Christopher Reeve himself was paralyzed. He was told that he'd never move again. He fell off his horse, he snapped a little bit of his neck, and he was completely paralyzed from the ground, from his neck down. And he was told, you will always be this way. You'll always be a cripple. And he decided that he was not going to take that. And he told people, he said, I'm going to figure out how to get my body back. That is the bridge between the mind and the body. Virgo being the ruler of the mind and the body bridge connection, right? Of this being that kind of Mercurian earth sign, right? And with this Ophiuchus being the wounded healer is the fact that even if you do address the physical, there is something underneath, a poison that is penetrating down into the body where you need to draw out the poison before you can fully heal. And this is a lot of what Christopher Reeve spent a lot of his time doing in the real world. And what happened? He kept going, and then just at the very end, before he passed away, he moved his fingers. He gained a little bit of mobility back, and he showed the world how powerful the mind can be to heal even the most broken bodies. And he didn't just do this just by doing all these crazy things. He spent years trying to figure out how to come back from this crippling accident. So he didn't end up just playing Superman, he ended up being a real-life Superman, and that is what a lot of the things that he is remembered for. So let's move on, right? Dean Cain, 1990s, right? So this is Dean Cain. He's a Cancer Sun, Sagittarius Moon, and he was the Superman for the Lois and Clark series, The New Adventures of Superman. Now, right away, you don't have to dig way too deep in this series to see Dean Cain's Cancer Sun and his Sagittarius Moon showing up. In the very first episode, Dean Cain's Clark Kent walks into the Daily Planet not as a scrappy nobody, but with a reference letter from a family friend, someone from his childhood who just happens to know Perry White. Why? Because Cancer moves through life using emotional ties, nostalgia, and family connections, right? It's not just about skills, it's about who do you know, it's about belonging somewhere, right? He's not just there for a job, he's there to hoping to find a new home in the city. And then, before you know it, He's dropping obscure trivia about holistic herbs from the Alongi tribe of New Guinea to help Perry with his blood pressure and telling him about these meditative practices that he experienced when he traveled the world. That's Sagittarian moon all over the place, of immersing yourself into different cultures and traveling the world and then coming back home and sharing that wisdom with people and thinking that you are slightly above them because they don't have the life experience that you have. And so his Clark already has shown himself to be traveling the world, learning things from people that most folks back at home had never even thought about, and he brings back this global knowledge into casual conversations, talking about, again, meditative states, new health concepts, and that was pretty forward thinking for the time. And what's interesting about Dean Cain is that his Clark Kent is definitely slightly more classier than some of the previous versions that came before him. We see this in small examples of him standing at attention whenever a woman enters the room. Like the first time he meets Lois Lane, he stands to attention out of sheer respect for her. And what's interesting is that he doesn't do this with the other characters. He doesn't have this formality around the other guys. He specifically does this with Lois and some of the other ladies. And this is that kind of Cancerian etiquette of wanting to impress with a level of nurturance and impressing the divine feminine energy and connecting with people on a more emotional and classier level. And when it really shows in how emotionally present Clark is with this Cancerian energy, we see this in him not running around the city trying to break stories all the time. We see him hanging out in his apartment, fixing his apartment, feeling things, thinking about things, being homesick, being lonely, being isolated, talking to his family, calling his mom all the time, calling his pa all the time, visiting his mom and dad for a good old family meal, home cooked food, right? Until he eventually bonds with Lois and then creates a whole domestic situation with her. But he's very emotionally adrift and he's very sensitive and he's very protective, and his Clark Kent is easily offended by Lois. He bristles at her criticisms and he has strong likes and dislikes, and he's not afraid to bicker with her. That's very Cancerian. His Clark Kent is a bit sentimental, a little bit moody, but has this core principle of protectiveness underneath it all. And what's really interesting is that his Lois and Clark, this series, for the first time, we're really seeing just Clark Kent and not necessarily Superman. And we're seeing his Clark Kent as a professional writer and not just a mild-mannered reporter. Someone who actually writes stories and feels like he wants to write and he writes stories that all have an emotional impact. They're trying to reach people on a heart-to-heart level. He even has moments where he's talking openly about being an orphan, expressing his personal longing for connection. And yet, like that Sagittarian moon spark, he's got that restlessness streak that makes him also slightly more spontaneous and sassy with Lois. There's an earlier episode, I think it's even just the first episode, when he meets Lois for the first time and she's scolding him and he shoots back with, "Okay, so you like to be on top. Got it," and smirks to himself. That's not that nerdy Virgo-ness of some of the previous Superman. That's that Sagittarian fire slipping out and being a little bit sassy. But of course, Cancer energy is everywhere in Dean's portrayal, and when Lois even visits his own home, she finds all of his favorite childhood foods and snacks that are stacked in his pantry, like comfort food that he's never quite grown out of, and she even comments on it. So interestingly enough, with some of the energy that we saw in George Reeves, there's not a lot of distinction between Dean's Clark and Dean's Superman. He plays them almost the same way. There's no real mask. He is just Clark. And so when it comes to this kind of Superman, he is protective, and he's also a little self-righteous, right? I mean, he doesn't hesitate to fly directly to Lex to confront him over and over again and tell him, "Hey, if you ever need me, just look up." Telling himself that he is above Luthor. He is on a pedestal above Luthor, that he knows more about the world, he's more wise, he's more humble, he's superior to Luthor in a way because of this status and this moral high ground. That is Sagittarian righteousness mixed in with that Cancer defensiveness, putting himself above his villain. And if you watch closely, you can actually see the body language of his Cancer energy coming out in his Superman, because his Superman is almost always standing with his arms crossed, like he's shielding himself, like he's hugging himself, like he feels exposed in his skin-tight suit and his cape, right? This is that kind of Cancer's shell on full display. And later in the series, even when the story drifts into like the season 4, it becomes less of like an obvious superhero action TV show and becomes more of a domestic drama where you have Clark and Lois, they're building a relationship, getting married, wanting to start a family, living their own life. And that wasn't just like the writers either. That was something that Dean Cain pushed for, and something that he openly said he wanted the show to explore afterwards. Let's do another series where Clark and Lois, we get married, we have kids, and we show what it is for Superman to be a dad and how to have a family, right? He wanted a more domestic approach. That's that Cancerian dream of this family life over action, this roots and lineage and heritage over glory. What's interesting is today, as Dean Cain's kind of Superman kind of fell off the wagon a little bit, right? But if you kind of just stop and like look at what he talks about and look at where he is now, he's kind of stepped away from the spotlight, and all he does is talk about his family. It's all about his kids, all about his family, all about what it means to be a father and all of that. So Dean Cain's Superman wasn't necessarily just a costume. It was almost like a Cancer dressed up in spandex, loyal, emotional, protective, and always yearning for a place to belong to. All right, so now we get into the early 2000s with Tom Welling as Clark Kent. Aries Sun and Cancer Moon. So let's talk about Tom Welling, who seemingly was the youngest actor to take on the role of Clark Kent at age 24, even though, funnily enough, that's right around the same age that Christopher Reeve was first cast as Superman. But the difference is that Tom never officially played Superman on screen. That's right. He strictly joined Smallville for their no flights, no tights rule, right? No tights, no cape. So nearly for over a decade, though, from 2001 to 2011, he was a generation's Clark Kent. And honestly, it makes sense because this was, quote unquote, Smallville. It was a modern reboot with a fresh look at the Superman mythos, which was suited perfectly for Tom's placement of the Aries Sun and the Cancer Moon. That Aries being interested in doing something different, doing something new. And Tom wasn't interested in doing something that everyone else was doing. He agreed to that no flights, no tights rule, which is a total Aries move of saying, you know what, the tights and the spandex, that's so uncool. We're just going to do it my way. We're going to do it different. And I'm going to do my own thing. And really, that's what we saw. His Clark was pure Aries Sun, Cancer Moon. The Aries being the naive, childlike, eager, constantly acting before thinking, constantly doing things, constantly being proactive, trying to get things done, trying to initiate things. And Tom's version of Clark, he loved to smile. He loved to joke. He tried not to take things too seriously unless his family got involved, right? But what we did through Smallville was get to see Clark. We watched him discover his powers. And that's something that is very unique and interesting for the Aries archetype is being enthralled in brand new experience, coming at something with fresh territory, figuring out as you go, building the race car as you drive. And that is very much what Tom's version of Clark Kent did. He wasn't just Superman. He wasn't just Clark. He was slowly starting to unravel who he was based on what he could do, what his functionality was, what his physical prowess was. And as the story progressed, we saw him develop each and every single one of his powers one by one and how he dealt with it. And so figuring this out on the go, that's what he did. He fumbled, he stumbled his way through his heat vision, his super hearing, his flight, his strength, his durability, sticking his arm into the tractor, right? This was all like unwrapping new toys on Christmas. And where previous versions of Clark Kent were more a reporter in the city, Tom's Clark was a lot more of that kind of local football star. He wanted to play sports. He wanted to win the game, get the girl, and that's that typical Aries hero archetype. Less of a philosopher and more of an athlete. Less of a chessboard and more of a let's pick up a basketball and play, right? And speaking of sports, we literally see Clark join the football team after he gets his powers, and he's not really hiding it at all. He, as Jonathan predicted, uses a little bit of his powers to get ahead because he's overly competitive. Why? Aries don't care what necessarily people think. They're going to do what they want to do when they want. And we kind of see this with Clark on Red K, and I'll get to that. But through a lot of this series, some of that Cancer Moon does creep in throughout Smallville as well. Clark is constantly adopting strays, and it's not just dogs and orphans, it's friends and classmates and drifters and even random celebrity cameos, right? People flock to Clark because they seem, for whatever reason, there's something about him that feels safe, it feels familiar, and it's like they can feel that nurturing Cancerian shell even when he's not sure what to do with himself. And that is also something that happens with Aries archetypes as well. A lot of Aries suns out there, people just for whatever reason just come and hang around them and just stay in their space because they know that the Aries is capable of protecting themselves, of being someone that you'd want to have in a pinch, in a fight, and you're going to make sure you're spending time around that person. And so a lot of quote-unquote strays find themselves attaching themselves to Aries because they know that they can be defended against. And with that Aries energy always doing what they want to do and being a leadership, people who are much more meek or incapable or underdogs always flock to natural leaders. And that's what we see happen with Tom Welling's Clark in Smallville. Now, I will say, here's the thing. Tom's Clark is also a little bit more self-centered than some of the other Superman. And that's not a knock on him. That's not a knock on the Aries archetype. This is just something we see with Aries archetypes of being more self-focused and self-centered, right? Especially, again, like what I mentioned before, and I'm going to get to it now. We see this version of Superman on Red K. right? Red K Clark, aka Evil Clark, which is really just Tom's Clark being unfiltered. And what happens when he has no inhibitions? What happens when he has no filters? He becomes selfish, impulsive. He takes what he wants when he wants it. He pushes people around. He uses his strength, his physicality to dominate people. He lashes out when people tell him what to do. He despises authority. He always goes against the grain. This is all energy of the Aries without a filter. And one of the most interesting things about Tom's portrayal is the fact that he's the first Clark Kent to actually ever be seen trying to make friends with Lex Luthor. He wants to believe in the best, in people. He wants to be friends, and he wants to play basketball with the kids. He wants to join the dunk tank fundraiser at the school and let Lois try to dunk him in the pool, right? He makes dad jokes. He's poking fun. He's a little bit witty. He's a little bit of a wisecrack as well, but in a way that's a lot more not as jokey, but it's something that you have to be paying attention in order to see it. And that's that Aries spark that we see of actively wanting to just, hey, at the end of the day, we're all just kids. Let's all just like have fun and get along. And so one of the things that we see with some of this with Luthor is that there's a little bit of this competitiveness between him and Lex. And that is just something that is naturally there with this Aries energy. But then that Cancer Moon pulls him back into the past over and over again. I mean, do I even have to say it? Lana freaking Lang, right? Tom Clark spends so much time of this series chasing after a version of his life that never really worked and was never going to work. And we see this because Cancer energy has a hard time letting go of the past, letting go of things. Once it gets caught up in its pictures, right? Everything's nostalgic, everything's romantic, and it leaves you stuck in what could have been rather than what is. So with this Cancer Moon of Tom, we kind of see that happen and play out over and over again. And let's not forget, Tom's Clark is also very protective of the women and children and family and pets, right? And when tragedy hits, he blames himself and he tries to hold the world of these emotional burdens on his shoulder and the emotional weight of other people in his heart space. And that is classic Cancerian protector vibes right there. It's also no coincidence that anytime anyone figures out his secret, they end up losing their memory in this show, whether by magic, divine intervention, plot devices. And Clark does this in a way because he needs to preserve that secret. He needs to preserve his realm of home, keep it safe, keep it secret. And this is all Cancerian energy. Cancer is the archetype that deals with the elderly, with children, right? With family, domestication, with protecting, with emotional memory, protecting memory, being nostalgic over memory, right? Preserving memory, right? And also sometimes holding secrets and having a sense of privacy and not allowing people to come into your world unless you want them to be there. And we see this from time to time that Clark is always trying to protect his privacy, right? Even to the point of gaslighting people or letting people emotionally project onto him and vice versa, and like pretending that they know what each other are feeling because things are just not outright spoken. Cancerian moons don't necessarily like to have to tell people what it is that they're going through, what it is that they're feeling, what it is that they like, what it is that they don't like, right? And we see Tom's Clark do this as well. So emotionally, Tom's Clark is a bit defensive. You know, when people call him out, he doesn't necessarily always apologize. He often retreats into silence, right? Or solitude, or gives people the cold shoulder a little bit because he doesn't want to explain himself, right? And we do see that kind of tug and pull with that Aries sun and the Cancer moon. Aries don't want to justify themselves. Cancers don't want to be exposed. And that's a pretty tough combo when dealing with things emotionally, right? But it's exactly what we saw from Tom Welling for about 10 straight years, right? 10 straight seasons, I mean. And then there's one of my favorite lines in the Smallville series, and that's when Chloe goes over to Clark and she says, you know what? You'll run into burning buildings because nothing can penetrate that deep steel skin of yours. But when it comes to putting your heart on the line, you hesitate or you're not there, or whatever the quote is exactly, right? That's Aries Sun, Cancer Moon, perfectly summarized. Aries charges into physical danger without a second, but the real danger is that emotional of vulnerability with the Cancerian heart. The moon sign being something that's close to our heart, and this is where Clark wears his armor, and this is what he protects. So if you thought that was something, here's the kicker. Even when he moves to Metropolis, even when Clark leaves Smallville finally and he goes to Metropolis and he starts working at the Daily Planet and starts dating Lois and all these things, he's always focused more on his heritage and figuring out more of how he can be or connect with his Kryptonian side, which is much, again, a Cancerian placement, to figure out where you come from and to honor your ancestry. And even as he does this, even with 10 years, right, of this show, he never leaves home. Even he's still 10 years in, he's still on Kent Farm. It doesn't matter what happens. Clark always comes back to the Kent Farm. Cancer rules over the home, the ancestry, the family roots. And even when he tries to embrace his Kryptonian side and he says, you know what, I'm going to kill the human side of me. I'm not going to be Clark Kent anymore. I'm going to be Kal-El. Everyone call me Kal-El. I'm going to go off and be the Blur, the red, blue Blur, whatever that is. He still comes back home and he's feeding the family dog, right? But anyways, it's not just about Superman and Clark Kent here, right? Smallville was about parenthood, and that was something that the writers talked about specifically. The creators of Smallville said this show is about parents. This show was designed to explore how upbringing shapes a person, how upbringing shapes the characters, right? Clark versus Lex, the Kents versus the Luthers, nature versus nurture, right? We see Clark and how he's raised by the Kents. We see Lex and how he's raised by Lionel. And there's a lot of episodes in this series where they flip the switch and they show Clark being raised by Lionel. They show Lex being raised by the Kents and vice versa. And anyone who comes in to try to parent Clark, it shows how their parental advisory influences him and his character. That is Cancerian nature, right? That is Cancer being the nurture. So Clark, he is a Cancer in boots running around Smallville trying to save people, keep the home safe, and basically try to honor all of the different facets of his childhood and his family life. So Tom's Clark wasn't necessarily the Superman that we knew before, but he was exactly that kind of Clark who was engaged with that Aries and Cancer energy putting together. He was impulsive, he was heroic, he was fiercely protective, he had the build of an Aries, he rushed through things, he didn't think things through, he acted before he thought, but then he was very deeply emotional. No matter how far he roamed, he always came back home. He was always taking care of the dogs. He was always giving a small, kind gesture and a pat to kids, women, and dogs, and the elderly, and that is something that we see with those energies. All right, so Brandon Routh, Virgo Sun, Taurus Moon. Let's talk about Brandon Routh. This was the Superman who I honestly believe was just released at the wrong time. His Clark Kent and Superman weren't necessarily bad, and it was far from it. But he essentially kind of fell into that Virgo Sun trap that Kirk Alyn did, right? Just doing what he was told, just following the rules of playing Superman, and then getting lost in translation, and then kind of being forgotten and overlooked, right? Brandon starred in Superman Returns, a movie that a lot of people still don't fully understand. Bryan Singer, who also happens to be a Virgo, very interesting, made the odd choice of remaking the first Christopher Reeve Superman movie, but decided that it was also a sequel at the same time, meaning he was remaking the first movie in terms of the plot, but he was making it a sequel in terms of the relationships and trying to progress the relationships of the characters. And yeah, that's pretty confusing, right? Redo the movie, but pretend the characters already know each other and they're still following the same relationship trajectory, so we don't have to completely restart. This made perfect Virgo sense to Bryan Singer, being efficient and clean and trying to keep the details, but forgetting the bigger picture. That's pretty classic Virgo setup right there. And Brandon himself, he did exactly what he was asked to do. And this is that Virgo following the rules and just leaning into the expectations of what people have of you, and not necessarily feeling like you can go off and do your own thing all the time. Brandon Routh's Clark Kent was an homage to Christopher Reeve's Clark, right? To the point that at times it almost felt like he was just doing an impersonation or an impression of Christopher Reeve doing a Superman portrayal. And we can't necessarily fault him for that because that was the assignment, that was the task, that was the job. And he kept that Virgo anxiousness baked into his Clark. Brandon's Clark was nerdy, was overly polite, and follow the rules, and to be honest, he was a little bit forgettable in that way that a lot of Virgo placements can be. They make themselves small in order to fit in, right? Where Christopher Reeve's Clark of his Virgo was, awkward and goofy, Brandon's was more of this just this anxious guy, right? A guy who just wanted to help out, but he didn't want to get in the way. Now, I would have loved to see Brandon's version in his sequel and how it could have evolved with him going against Brainiac, which was the plan, right? Because we eventually got to see how he was able to bring that nerdy charm to his Ray Palmer character in Legends of Tomorrow, right? And Brandon shines in that role. He was very natural at it. But we didn't get to see that here with Superman Returns. But what we did see with his Superman was something that was very efficient, right? His Virgo Superman and Clark was very efficient, and his Taurus Moon showed in as his simplicity. And that's the thing with the Taurus Moon, is being someone who's predictable, simple, steady, and honestly, sometimes a little bit boring. Taurus is grounded, but what you see is what you get. There really is not a whole lot of depth there. And that can be great for an accountant, but not necessarily for a superhero, right? And the audiences felt it. They wanted to see charm, pizzazz, something new, something engaging, maybe some explosives, maybe some fights. And what they got was a Superman who felt ordinary, safe, predictable. And honestly, that's that kind of Virgo shadow and that Taurus blend of just getting stuck in a rut and just being so focused on doing the right things, but not taking any risks. And that's that kind of earth sign. It's not necessarily about risk taking. It's about following the standard, right? Now, what I do love about Brandon's Superman is his focus. We talked about this, his efficiency, that Virgo-ness of being meticulous. And you can't watch Superman Returns and say that Superman doesn't know what he's doing, because every move is precise, every save is calculated, and every use of his powers is very refined. It's the most refined version of Superman that we've ever seen. That's Virgo to a T. His Superman has been practicing, has been getting better, has been perfecting and sharpening the details of his powers. His flying is smooth, his heat vision is crisp, his super breath puts out fires with ease, and there's nothing wasted, nothing sloppy, and this is Virgo's service at its finest. And a lot of those things are very memorable when he's flying around the city, right? And he's using his heat vision to burn the glass that's falling and turn it into sand, right? It's very efficient, it's very clean. And it's a lot of this efficiency comes and is the most obvious in that plane crash scene, right? It's still one of the best Superman sequences to be put on film. And what makes it work is because Superman is not just flying to stop a plane. He is problem solving, and that is the Virgo. I'm going to break things down step by step and just problem solve, and I need to break this down so I can really figure out what it is that I'm doing and how I need to move forward. I can't just run in half-fast. I need to be able to come up with a plan and know what I am doing ahead of time so that I don't make mistakes, right? And we see that with this version. He says, he didn't say this, but step by step we see his Superman go, if I just stop this plane, it's going to break apart. I need to guide it. I need to slow it down. I need to reduce its impact. I need to control its gravity. I need to land it safely. And we see this energy, this earth energy, Taurus Moon, Virgo Sun. We see the realism, the practicality. It's not flashy. It's not necessarily chaotic. It's clean execution of Superman safely and scientifically taking down a plane full of people without harming anyone on board, right? That is that practicality of the earth sign. Boom. This is how we need to do it. This is the realism. This is the potential danger. This is how we're going to do it. That's it. And much like the Virgo archetype, throughout this movie, even though he does do some incredible things like this, the people still overlook him. They don't take him seriously. And we even see this with Lois and Lex. Lois dismisses Superman and Clark, and Lex toys with Superman. And he even gets beat up by just low-grade, everyday henchmen, right? How dare you, Kumar? But seriously, this version of Superman is often overlooked, underestimated, unassumed, just forgotten, and is brutalized by just regular guys in jeans, right? And even worse, his big villain moment isn't really Lex, it's Lex's plan. It's the movie's tension is about the real estate development. It's like Brandon's version of Clark Kent Superman just showed up to do the calculus, and the audience was expecting fireworks, right? And they just walked into the wrong classroom. And this is kind of that Virgo fate. You do the hard work, and sometimes you don't always get the credit for it. Sometimes you're just forgotten, like Kirk Alyn. Things are clean, things are efficient, but you're just doing what you're told to do. You're just doing what the standard is, and just, hey, well, that happened. That was a thing. It was pretty average. It's pretty ordinary. Nothing special, nothing crazy, and we're just going to move on, right? For me personally, I'm going to give credit where credit's due, and I personally think that Brandon Routh's voice lends itself the best to Superman out of all the live-action Superman actors. I really liked how Brandon Routh's voice attributed to the character, and much of his acting came from his voice. And what's interesting, you wouldn't know it, Taurus rules over the throat. Taurus rules over the vocal cords and producing a melodic melody with your words, with your voice, and that is something that we kind of see, right? So even if his body language was a bit reserved, I feel like his voice did all the heavy lifting. It was warm, it was comforting, it was believable. So I'd give him 10 out of 10 for just acting with his voice. So, that's kind of the tragedy of it all. Brandon Superman, he actually does go through the Virgo trial. He pre-plans, he executes perfectly, but then like many Virgos, he just, at the end of the movie, look, he gets sick from overexertion. That's pretty Virgoan, right? You do all the pre-planning, you know exactly what you're going to do, and then you get stressed out, you overtax your body, and then you're dealing with sickness. Health is a big, big theme and concern with the Virgo archetype. So you remember him lifting that Kryptonian island? Well, now you know. It was the one that was infused with the kryptonite, right? The thing that can kill him and poison him. He's able to do it anyway. Why? Because service, duty, the job had to get done. He goes up, he charges himself up first. He prepares himself to do that. Then he goes down and he's only able to lift the kryptonite island because he was supercharged. But then he exerts all his energy and he falls into a coma. And we see Superman in the hospital, right? Something very Virgoan. And nursing being ruled over by Taurus, right? So that's very interesting anyways, that's a side tangent, but Virgo energy, folks, perfecting the details, wearing yourself out, getting sick, that's the story of Virgo right there. And at least Brandon got his little Kingdom Come moment later on in Crisis on Infinite Earths, that crossover, right? That was pretty cool. And finally, we got to see what he could do a little bit with the right creative team. And I thought he did really good in that. But obviously nowadays, poor Brandon Routh, he's usually out sitting somewhere pondering what went wrong and is giving interviews about saying that he doesn't know what went wrong. And the answer is nothing, Brandon. You didn't do anything wrong. It was just the wrong time, the wrong team with all the right potential. You deserved better. And so, frankly, so did we. All right, so let's move on to Henry Cavill's Superman, probably one of the most favored or polarizing Superman up to date. Henry Cavill is a Aries Sun and a Capricorn Moon. So we get to see Henry Cavill, probably, again, the most polarizing Superman of modern cinema. And yet, now that he's being replaced by Corenswet, everyone's asking for him to come back. And that's so funny. Isn't that the Superman way, right? Do you remember during BVS when suddenly people were defending Brandon Routh in Superman Returns? So this is kind of just history repeating itself, right? Superman is a very thankless job until he's gone. But anyways, let's keep this split. So why the split? It's very simple. Henry Cavill's Superman was all action. It was all weight, it was all pressure, and that's guaranteed to be talking about a Aries Sun and a Capricorn Moon all day, right? So we see the Aries energy lives in his physical presence, right? Aries is the fighter, the competitor. Aries wants to win, wants to break through walls, wants to get stuff done. And Henry's Superman was built for war. This dude looked exactly like Superman should. I think we can all agree he looks the most like Superman. You know, he's got that massive build, that Greek god in spandex look, right? Perfect. But while the physical looked right, we did tend to kind of seem ourselves emotionally split with his vibe. And that's where people got divided. And it's not a big surprise as to why, with this having this kind of Superman showcasing a Capricorn Moon energy, right? The Aries Sun in Henry Cavill Superman wanted to go and just punch through things. But that Capricorn wanted to hold the world on his shoulders like Atlas and take all the responsibility and burdens and guilt and responsibility on his shoulders, and it weighed him down in every single scene, right? We saw that. Aries energy is explosive. Capricorn energy is slow. It's heavy. It's disciplined. It's restricted. It's pessimistic. That was a deliberate choice. What if Superman felt like an obligation rather than a gift? That is what we got. That is that Capricorn Moon energy, right? It was a brilliant concept, but people didn't come to Superman for burdens. They came for hope and for flight and for saving kittens and trees, right? And Zack Snyder, being that Aquarian that he is, had to flip this on its head, and he made Superman into a sci-fi rather than a comic book, right? A stranger in a strange land, an alien trying to be human, and him being alienated, not belonging, right? And that is the version that we got. So Henry Cavill leaned into his Capricorn Moon and brought this into his version of Clark and his version of Superman. He was always alone. He was riddled with guilt over Jonathan Kent's death, so much more than any other iteration out there, right? He was torn between the lessons of his father figures, his biological father and his earth father, Jonathan Kent and Jor-El, right? And everything was just so saddened with responsibility, and everything was so serious and so pessimistic. Even Superman himself, Henry Cavill Superman himself, said, Superman was never real. And he also said, no one stays good in this world, right? That's Capricornian energy right there. That is the moon burden. I don't feel like this is, I'm good enough. I don't feel like I can trust this world. I don't even know if I can trust myself. And you know what? The world doesn't care. They want me to bottle up my emotions. They want me to just suck it up and just get the work done and just do my job, do my duties. And that is why his Clark Kent was basically Superman. In a vice versa of some of the previous actors that we had seen, like, you know, Tom Welling's character just being Clark with Dean Cain and George Reeves. Their version was just Clark Kent being the same, right, as their Superman. And this version, we see that Henry Cavill's Superman is more of the dominating factor, and his Clark Kent is more of his Superman. Why? Because you can't look past his Supermanness. This is that he wakes up as Superman. He's not Clark Kent. He is that Superman, right? You can't hide that body with posture. You can't hide his physicality, right? And you're getting this look of, yeah, that's Superman, regardless of whether he's wearing glasses or not, right? So other actors like George Reeves, Dean Cain, Christopher Reeves, they kind of start, you know, they have a blendedness in their personas, but Cavill, it was more of the, this is my job, right? This is my role, and I'm trying to figure that out. And I don't blame him. Aries doesn't hide. Aries stands up, and Capricorn does its duty, even if it's uncomfortable. And Superman became a job. It was like a uniform, a soldier in a uniform, and that's very much how he acted. Like he was a soldier in uniform. Aries being the warrior, Capricorn being uniform and authoritarian, right? So not that he was necessarily authoritarian, but anyways, what we do see a little bit is that if you look into like the actual True Sidereal Astrology of Cavill, we do see that his Mercury is retrograde in Taurus a little bit. So that didn't necessarily help him with the quick-witted department of being a little bit more fiery as opposed to like Tom Welling's Aries gave us. But Henry does deliver more of a stoic, measured, quiet Superman with an internal monologue always going on, right? So that is more of that kind of Capricornian and that kind of retrograde Mercury going on, this internalized thinking, this internalized processing, and trying to rationalize the emotions and thinking about it rather than feeling it, right? Or just doing the Aries thing and just finding a physical outlet for all those emotions and what was really going on. So where Aries came through, obviously in the Cavill version of Superman, was very obvious, right? It came through wildfire. It was in the fights, right? Forget saving cats. Cavill Superman is out there going full Dragon Ball Z style and just punching everybody, right? On the big screen. He's punching Zod through skyscrapers. He's smashing through trains. It's absolute carnage, right? It wasn't a, hey, can I save these civilians? It was like a, hey, who's in my way? I'm going to smash through them and get to the real fight, right? That's Aries. Aries doesn't step back to check on pedestrians. It knows its target. It's charging head first. It's got its threat in its sights, and there's no hesitation. It's jumping into action. It's going to initiate, right? And Cobra Kai, he's going to strike first, right? And while we do see that Cavill Superman does spend a lot of time trying to gain respect, try to do the good thing, try to gain a good reputation and a rapport with the authorities of America, that is all Capricornian energy. But he has no problem doing that Aries Sun thing and destroying their satellite when they try to figure out who he is in his private life, right? That's that Aries not being afraid of confrontation. He literally smashes the thing right next to the general and says, like, hey, cut it out. Like, I'm going to help you, but it's got to be on my terms, and you get to convince Washington of that. I'm American. I was born in Kansas. Deal with it, right? And then he flies off. He super speeds away, right? That's Aries energy all the way, right? I'm going to work along with the government, Capricorn Moon, but I'm going to do it my own way. That's Aries Sun right there. And this is really important because we do get to see glimpses of Henry Cavill Superman be a little bit lighter later on when Joss Whedon takes his version of the Justice League, right? Despite the horror in the CGI lip show, right? But his version of Superman in that was much more playful, had much more ability to kind of take things light and almost share that kind of inner child of that Aryan energy, right? He had playful banter with the Flash, not being invited to brunch and things like that. He's smirking with Cyborg. They're laughing at the end of how something was super painful. That's Aries. Aries, much like Leo, they kind of represent that inner child of the zodiac. And so while you're looking at these kind of this fire sign energy, you're really either playing or you're fighting. And so this playful fighting energy does show up in Joss Whedon's version of Henry Cavill Superman, right? And you want Superman with a grin. You want him to have fun with his powers, right? And the Aries energy is just less goofy, right? It's still playful, but it's less goofy, and that's what we saw with Henry Cavill Superman in there, right? That's Aries underneath all that Capricornian weight. So the tragedy obviously comes in with being mishandled by Warner Brothers, right? That kind of Capricornian energy, the authoritarian regime, the producers coming in and changing the creative vision, that Aries creative vision of the character, of what it is, right? Man of Steel, a decent foundation, could have used more joy and better pacing, quicker pacing, right? Batman vs Superman, great ideas, horrible pacing, too much, too quickly, killing off your main character, right? In its sequel, that's pretty bold, right? Justice League, theatrical cut, studio mutilation, should have never happened. Zack Snyder Justice League finally gave Henry a proper showcase, well, a little bit too late and still a little bit too serious, right? And what's great about this is that Henry Cavill never complained. He didn't trash the directors. He didn't mouth the studios. He took the Aries hit in the face and carried the Capricorn responsibility and kept moving forward in a very mature and respectable manner, right? That's Aries Sun, Capricorn Moon right there. Disciplined, dutiful, mixed with courage and grit. He played the Superman for a world that didn't deserve him, and Superman for the real world and not a comic book world. And because of that realism, it didn't connect the way that audiences wanted. They didn't want a messiah. They wanted a hero. But sometimes superheroes don't always fit neatly into the pessimistic narratives of Man of Steel and BVS. And Henry Cavill will always have a place, obviously, in our hearts in the Superman lineup, not because of how fun he was, but because of how much responsibility he carried with that cape without complaint. And that's exactly the way an Aries Capricorn would play it, right? So that is what we see with Henry Cavill's Superman. Very bold, very action-oriented, was very much about more of a stunt man performing a bunch of feats rather than an actor, right? And then that Capricornian energy of constantly being burdened by guilt and slow pacing, right? Capricorn ruled over by Saturn takes everything so slow. There's delays, there's restrictions, all these kinds of things. And then Aries is just all action, right? And that's what we saw in Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, the Snyder Cut, Justice League. That's all we saw. Okay, so now we've reached the hour mark. Let's get to Tyler Hoechlin. And Tyler Hoechlin is our Leo Sun and Aries Moon. This is the Superman of the Arrowverse. This is the Superman who made his first appearance in Supergirl, right? And what's interesting about Tyler Hoechlin is that he showcases his Clark Kent and Superman as the family man, right? This is our double fire sign Superman. And I'll be honest with you, when they first announced his casting, I was a little skeptical. I mean, his physicality to me didn't necessarily scream Superman at a first glance, but I'm going to give credit where credit's due. Once he put on the suit, he did understand the essence of the character. And right out of the gate in Supergirl, we saw exactly what that Leo Sun Superman looks like. Warm, positive, approachable, fun, right? Always going out of his way to make sure that people feel special. The moment, like when Clark shows up on screen and he's smiling and he's goofy and he's charming, he's making other people feel good about themselves, that's Leo energy all the way. Making people feel special and making them feeling seen, making them feel heard, even though we all know that despite the fact that the lion is the king of the jungle, right? And it wasn't even just a smile. I mean, it was even smizing. And we saw this with him all the way, right? The Leo is always performing, even when they're not on stage. And everything is a theater to a Leo. And Tyler played Clark and Superman like a seasoned performer. Like he was just happy to be there. He wasn't intimidated by the character. He was having fun, having a good time. And that is what he wanted to do. And what really sold me on a part of his version of Superman and Clark Kent was his wholesomeness, right? Tyler Superman wants people to feel special. He wants them to feel taken care of. He's shaking hands with soldiers. He's looking kids in the eye. He's saying, hey, my mom made this soup for me, right? He's connecting first. He's acting second. That's that Leo energy. Let me light you up before I fly off and stop the asteroid, right? Now, I will say his Superman and Lois TV show leaned heavily into the other side of the Leo, which is legacy, right? Of your children being your legacy. And this is probably one of my main issues with the show and why I didn't really enjoy the show as a whole, because it wasn't about Superman. It was about him being a father, right? With Leo ruling over the fifth house being children, creativity, and personal pride. And what's more is we see the Leo archetype is about raising your own dynasty, right? Going off on your own, creating your own pride, right? Being the center of your own universe, your own life, right? Raising the next generation. And that was this entire series just thrusted into our faces. It wasn't about Metropolis. It wasn't about the Daily Planet. It wasn't necessarily about Superman. It was about the Kent family unit and how it was really about being a father with real superpowers, the dad bod, right? The dad with superpowers. And honestly, that was where it lost me personally. I didn't care about the kids. I didn't like the acting of the Jordan actor at all. I wanted a Superman story and not a domestic drama, right? And that's not Tyler's fault. That was the writers leaning into that archetype of raising your pride and carrying the legacy through your children and all that stuff, right? But if we can talk about how he showed up in Superman, we still see that with a little bit of that Aries moon energy. This is where we see Superman again on TV throwing a lot of punches, right? Every major villain in this show, Clark basically just runs up and clocks them one, right? He loses his powers, not a problem. He's still throwing fisticuffs with Lex Luthor in the street, right? He's still throwing fists. He gets depowered by sunlight or kryptonite, doesn't matter. He's standing up and he's punching people, right? That's Aries energy. That's Aries energy all the way, right? That's the kid who gets pushed on the playground and they just pop right up and say, hey, don't do that. Like, don't mess with my pride, don't mess with me, don't mess with my family, right? And they get into a little fist fight, right? And that's what we saw all over Superman and Lois, right? And it wasn't just in the battles, it was even at home with Clark's parenting style, right? The Aries moon, again, competitiveness. He tests his son by fighting them. You know, if you knock me over, I know you're ready, right? Classic Aries initiation by fire. You gotta beat me, you gotta take me down, you gotta prove to me that you're strong enough, that you're stronger than me, blah, 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 right? He doesn't necessarily just try to teach his kids through lectures, he teaches them how to spar with him, right? Aries doesn't necessarily just talk about growth, they test for it. And Tyler Superman showed that he was testing his children and he was testing people all the time as a coach, as a mentor, as a father, whether they were at home, whether they were on the football field. We see this with this double fire sign, right? It's all about play or fight. And that's how Tyler balanced it. Playing footballs with his son, punching Lex Luthor in the face in the street. You get that Leo Aries energy. Aries finds itself naturally in sports again and being a coach of sports and teaching kids sports and all those things, right? And that's something that we see with Tyler Hoechlin's version of Superman and being a sports coach and being more athletic oriented again, more into sports. And one thing I'll say that I did love about Tyler Superman was his ability to balance confidence and encouragement. You see, Leos know they're kings, but the best Leos, they don't rule with tyranny, they rule with warmth, right? They're more of like a personal cheerleader. They make people feel like kings. And that's what Clark tried to do with the people that he really cared about. He was always trying to encourage them to step into their greatness, even if it meant letting them challenge him from time to time, even if it meant making mistakes. And that's the right kind of Leo leadership, right? And when it didn't work, right, and people didn't take him as seriously, that's also a classic Leo wound of him being too much of a cheerleader, right? Being too warm, being too much of a, okay, well, it's really not that big of a deal, right? And anytime Clark or Superman fell into this role, they took advantage of his kindness, especially his kids, and of course, his father-in-law, General Sam Lane, right? And while we're here, I also think I would have loved to see more of a pre-family Superman from Tyler. We got a glimpse of it in Supergirl that was playful and spontaneous and a little dorky, right? A Superman who was quick to give compliments. He was fast with one-liners. He was never too proud to laugh at himself. That was kind of that sweet spot that I would have liked to see a little bit more. That confident, charismatic, playful, but not as arrogant, right? And his Superman shines in those kind of moments. And his Superman also shines in some of his emotional speeches and his heart-to-heart moments, But if you crossed him, obviously that Aries moon would say, all right, the gloves are going to come off. I'm going to start yelling. I'm going to start fighting. I'm going to start throwing fists. And that's what's going to happen. But in terms of capturing that kind of Leo Sun, Aries moon in his Clark and his Superman, I think he absolutely nailed it. Very proud, very protected, very loving, but ready to throw hands if you threaten his family, right? So this is just Super Dad in Tights, Fire Edition. So here's the thing. Can we look at the astrology of the true sidereal placements of David Corenswet to talk about what kind of Superman he will be? And David is a Gemini sun and an Aquarius moon. And this is uncharted territory for the character of Superman Clark Kent. Why? Because this is the first time that we've had a double air sign as Superman. We saw the double fire sign in Tyler being a mix of play and fighting. We saw the double earth in Brandon being practical and pragmatic. And now we're seeing this kind of double air sign. And air is going to be representing something entirely new. And this is going to be a new version of Superman that we've ever seen before. Why? Because air signs love to talk. And air signs, they think, they analyze, they commentate, and they stir the pot necessarily with fists, but more with ideas. They're less driven by action. They're not weighed down by emotional processing, and they need to think and process things out loud. And so right away, what my prediction is, and based off of even before of what we've kind of seen, is a little bit of what we've seen from the trailers, is that David Corenswet Superman is going to be very chatty. He's going to be very talkative, very quippy, very witty, very clever, a bit detached, and might be a little self-aware, but is going to be something that's very light, and is something that's going to be, maybe for lack of a better word, superficial. And the reason why is because of that air energy. Air energy is something that intellectualizes emotions. It thinks things out, it processes things, and needs to talk about things rather than feeling them. It's all about the conversation. And right away, when you're watching the trailers of the new Superman movie, even before the first trailer hit, you felt that tone coming, right? You heard James Gunn was directing Superman, and he said, oh, okay, this is going to be a lot more of a Marvel movie. He is mostly known for his Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And that is his style, doing big ensemble, quippy, funny, lighthearted things, right? With just little moments that hint at this bigger picture of things being about family and community. And Gemini energy is all about community. And while James Gunn himself is a Cancer, and he's always focused on family, home life connections, like what it means to outlive the legacy of your parents or whatever that is, he does like the Gemini energy, and he does like his Gemini actors. You got Chris Pratt, Star-Lord. He's a Gemini. He's working one of his best friends, Michael Rosenbaum, is probably going to make an appearance in this movie. He is a Gemini as well. Okay. So we're going to see a more Star-Lord version of Superman. He's going to be that Gemini quippy version of Superman. So you watch the trailers, what we're seeing with this double air sign, this Gemini Sun, this Aquarian Moon, what do we see in the trailers? We see Superman getting arrested for entering a foreign country, and Lois Lane is talking to him about entering this country illegally, going against doing his own thing. And throughout the trailer, he's continuously joking. He's making things not a big deal. He goes against the grain. He's not afraid to break rules. He's rebelling against authority. He's rebelling against the system, rebelling against the way things were. That's Aquarian Moon energy all over the place. And what we see is a lot of smirks, a lot of shrugs. We see Lois talking over him. We see him making quips. We see him, we see a lot of things happen throughout the trailer that just keeps things amusing. That's Gemini Sun and Aquarius Moon all day long. Rebellious, clever, amusing, slightly disconnected from the emotional gravity of what's actually happening, right? And that's what kind of kept a lot of those Marvel movies afloat for a lot of people. was there would be this big emotional scene that would come up, and then it would be cut. The energy would be cut, the tension would be cut by a joke. And that's, I think, what we'll see a lot more in the Superman movie. Not necessarily because it was done by James Gunn, but because David Corenswet is a Gemini. And if we're looking at these kind of archetypes, this kind of Aquarius Moon always feels like the lone wolf, the outsider, the one with double standards, the one who's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, right? And in David Corenswet's Superman, I think that's what we're going to see. He's going to be intellectual, he's going to be aloof, he's going to be more of a, well, that's interesting type of vibe while he's punching his villains, and he's going to make things much more lighthearted and less serious. He'll, I think, be slightly more of like a Spider-Man-esque, right? So is this going to work? It depends on what you want from Superman, right? Gemini suns, they don't take life seriously. They're curious, lighthearted, adaptable. They're a little restless. They're often juggling far too many interests, right? All at the same time. They spread themselves too thin. They're unfocused, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing fit with this approach to this new Superman movie. It's not just a Superman movie. This is the first David Corenswet solo Superman film, and it's already become an ensemble film, right? Instead of focused on Superman, we're seeing this intimate Superman story about the rest of the cast, right? Gemini energy can't do one thing. Gemini energy wants to do everything all at once, all at the same time, and that's what we'll see with this Superman. It's not just Superman and Lois. It's not just Superman. This is Superman, Lois, Krypto, Jimmy, Lex, Ultraman, the Engineer, the Brainiac, right? We got all his robots, right? We got all those other characters. We got Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner's Green Lantern. We've got Hawk Girl, right? Metamorpho. We got we have all these characters, right? It's a big ensemble thing. And it's all filled with jokes and banter, right? And this is what's going to be this version of Superman. Hundreds of threads going all at once, all at the same time. It's going to be busy, and it's not going to sit still for very long. And I'm curious to see where this will land. On the one hand, it'll probably be fun. And this Clark Kent and this Superman, they're going to be very talkative and very quippy. On the other hand, it could lack a lot of emotional depth. We might get a Superman who's funny and sharp and clever, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of gravitas to this Superman. So when you think about Christopher Reeve's Superman and how he felt through things, or we saw Cavill's Superman kind of carry the burden of things, right? Or Hoagland's Superman kind of balancing warmth with heart-to-heart moments. David's Superman might be more like another Star-Lord. And here's the Achilles heel, right? Gemini and Aquarius love detachment. That means emotional moments may feel surface level. They may feel superficial, right? The quips may be too flippant. We're seeing this all over in the trailers. Krypto slamming into him while he's down and he's hurt. It's funny. Lois steamrolling his interview. It's comedic, right? He's hugging kids while things are going crazy behind him. It's comedic, right? Now, there could be a little bit of depth to him because Corenswet does have his Mercury in Cancer, so he doesn't 100% express himself fully the way a natural Gemini might. But, we'll see. So the potential for heart moments are there, but it looks like James Gunn wants this version, and David wants this version to be funny first, and then action, and then having some depth. So that's kind of what we're seeing. So Aquarian Moon, what we're kind of seeing is that this Superman is going to feel like something that doesn't quite fit in. He's going to be different than all the different versions of Superman. You're going to have a lot of people saying, this is not the Superman from the comics. This is something completely different, right? And that's going to be that kind of double standard of Superman. I think there will be a core to David Corenswet's character that is much more lighthearted and campy, and that's kind of what people have been asking for. But we're also going to see a Superman that doesn't play by the rules because of that Aquarian Moon. He's not going to want to fit in. He's not going to want to do things traditional. He's not going to want to do things the way that people expect him to do it. And his Superman is going to be a little weird. His Superman's going to be a little bit off. His Superman's going to be a little bit zany or unique. His Clark's going to be a little bit weird, right? And it may not quite feel like the character we're used to because he's going to try to do things in a way that's a little bit different, right? Aquarius energy, Gemini energy, this mix is going to bring a Superman that's a little bit indie, right? This is a different brand. This is a Marvel brand. This is a James Gunn brand, and this is going to be what we're going to see. Lots of jokes, a lot of detachment, and will this work? We'll see. It's going to be very entertaining, yes. We're going to have fun. We're going to be mentally stimulated. It's going to be fast-paced. It's going to be quippy. There's going to be a lot going on. And legacy-wise, however, I don't see this movie maybe holding up in maybe 5 years or 10 years. I think people are going to appreciate the freshness, light. The kids will enjoy it. It's going to be fun. But across the board, when people look back at it, it's not going to be something that's a lot of people are going to be talking about how it emotionally made them feel a lot of things. Like I said, it's totally possible there's some heartfelt moments. James Gunn is a family man, right? But Gemini to a T, this is going to feel more like a sitcom mixed in with indie rebellion. And that's kind of what I think we'll get with this version of Corenswet. Okay. So honestly, I'm more interested in seeing how Rachel Brosnahan will do as Lois Lane and how Nicholas Hoult will do as Lex Luthor. And I know that Nathan Fillion is going to own Guy Gardner, even though I hate Guy Gardner. But David Corenswet himself, I watched him in The Politician. I didn't think he was that good of an actor. And there's a couple other actors in this particular casting that just I have seen work from that I don't particularly enjoy or think are very good actors. So we'll see. This version of Superman is going to be entertaining, but will he move you? That's the real question. I mean, he's also surrounded in robots. I think they'll probably take a lot of comedic pull in this film with Superman. And what's interesting about that is that Gemini rules over the internet, right, and social media, and Aquarius rules over AI and robotics. And this is the first time we'll see Superman in his Fortress of Solitude, hanging out with his robots and his AI, right? And not even they are taking things seriously. Even they are trying to be funny and quippy and campy. And so what I think we're going to see, honestly, is just a show of a lot of different things moving all at once. I think rather than just focusing on a full James Gunn, a full Superman movie, a solo Superman movie with a really good actor, someone who's really got great acting chops, we're going to see an ensemble cast where James Gunn can put a lot of screen time to the side characters and just have Superman just kind of there or just relate to these other characters and they kind of take the world by storm, or they're funny and he's just reacting and the focus isn't going to be so much on Superman. When you get an ensemble cast, you're giving yourself almost an easy out to spend so much energy on all these different characters and making them interesting rather than focusing everything on Superman. So, but what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love talking about astrology. I'm a master True Sidereal Astrologer as well as an actor. And so I am obsessed with superheroes. I love DC and I'd love to see some proper representation in the cinema world. And yeah, let me know. Do you see these astrological things playing out in your favorite version of Superman or in these Superman? I sure do. I think it's very obvious and I think it'll be very obvious with David Corenswet as well.